Archie Playclards the fourth. PlayLab.
All right, my name is Archie. This is the father of urbanism. I started a design studio in 2008 with my best friend, Jeff Franklin, who's sitting here as well. PlayLab is a place where we go to do whatever we want to do. We study architecture as well as graphic design and everything in between. And we're interested in a lot of different things. And so we wanted a place where we could explore those things and propose ideas in a safe place and try to figure out ways to make them happen using all of those means of design. That's a really hard thing to do, to propose ideas without money and with people thinking you're crazy most of the time. So it's incredibly helpful to meet people that care about those things, as you guys seemingly do. 10 p.m. on a Saturday night, drinking absinthe. Yeah. So we try to meet as many people as we can, as often as we can. One of those guys is a guy by the name of Dong Ping Wong, who started an architecture office here in the city the same time we started our office in 2008. He kind of cares about the same issues we do, and he doesn't really think that things aren't possible, so it worked out to be a pretty good friendship. I'm going to breeze through 3 projects. You can talk to me afterwards if you want to know more. The first 2 we did with Dong, and they range in scale in terms of how big they are, what type of design was employed to create them, but also at what point these projects are actually in production. Boom, number 1.
Whoa. I just fell asleep and now I'm awake again.
So there's a nonprofit organization called Storefront for Art and Architecture, and then the New Museum of Contemporary Art put out a public call for a competition to kind of rethink this typical white tenting structure. Sorry, as well as the Department of Transportation was involved in this as well. Very much so. To rethink this typical white tent structure and create something that, or propose something that would kind of change the way that vendors or people would interact with a normal sort of street festival. So we took that challenge and we basically proposed a modular system that we called worms that were based in these little increments. So you could take this little guy and put it with that little guy, and you could kind of snake it around. So it was built from these just bent metal ribs, kind of like a slinky. So instead of just a 4-cornered post white tent, you could have this new sort of thing that could behave any way that it wanted to in any situation in the city. And we thought that was pretty fun. We didn't really think it was going to get picked. So we kind of showed a lot of different situations and named them. This is elephant tusk. This is flashlight. This is floppy burrito. And then the incredible, eloquent, cool shape. And this was basically the site we were proposing at on Rivington Street, and how we proposed that multiple of these tents could interact. We, of course, had no idea how much these things would cost, or how tough they would be to build in a month and a half. This is how we showed it in front of the new museum, that these things could glow and really kind of capture the imagination of a public. This is showing them with some fake vendors, some strawberries, some briefcase men. And so, long story short, we won the competition and we had to build these things really, really quickly. This is us setting it up the day of the festival and stretching the skin over the worm structure. And this is what they ended up looking like the day of. Unfortunately, we had a very small amount of egress on this fire lane, so we couldn't really worm them like we wanted to. They hopped the curb once or twice. Otherwise, they were pretty much in a straight line, but at the same time, I think pretty successful. So that's an example of city organizations and nonprofit organizations getting together to actually get somebody else to propose an idea for the city, which is incredibly amazing. This is my second example, which is a completely initiated project by both Dong and our office. And it basically revolved around the fact that we were looking at the river as a pretty enormous resource, being on the island of Manhattan, you're completely surrounded by water on all sides, but ironically, it's a very dirty and polluted body of water that you can't actually swim in. So on a hot summer day, we kind of thought it would be really nice to swim in this thing. But since you couldn't, we thought, well, we would propose a project that would allow us to swim in the river. And we decided we would propose a floating pool for the river that would filter the water of the river so that you could actually swim in clean water in the river. So we proposed a project called Plus Pool. And it's essentially 4 pools stuck together in the shape of a plus. So you can have lap swimming, different sort of sports, lounge, sort of floaty things. And then you create a pool. The idea was that the actual walls of the pool themselves would filter the water passively, which we didn't know how would work, but we decided to propose it anyways. This is people having a grand old time around the swim meet. Just having a grand old time around the rest of the pool. And this diagram shows how we kind of thought about the pool as sort of like a typical city intersection, actually removed from the city and dropped into the river as a new place to actually build architecture. This is sort of, we kind of thought it as a new iconic landmark for the city. We thought if we could show other people this, that they would kind of see it the same way. So we built a ton of renderings, drew a ton of renderings, and proposed this in a lot of different sites in New York. As architects, we could come up with the idea, but more importantly, as graphic designers, we could try to communicate the idea to people and try to start a discussion. We didn't know how to make a floating pool that would cost millions and millions of dollars. We just knew we could have this idea and we could talk to people about it. So long story short, after a bunch of flat people renderings, flat people swimming in the river, more. We branded this thing Plus Pool, and the idea was that if we could convince people that the city would be better with a pool, and that everyone else would be better with a pool, and certainly the water would be better with a pool, that maybe we could get people behind this thing. And so blindly, since we didn't know how to talk to people, we just made a bunch of newsprint, some books, and just kind of sent them to everyone we possibly could. The book said basically the most simplest things it possibly could, and we put up a website, sent it to a few blogs, and basically proposed, like, wouldn't it be nice to have this pool right now? And at the top you can see there's a link that says get involved, and it just says we need architects, engineers, city planners, everyone we could possibly think of, which was, that was going to be the end of the project, basically. And so within 2 days, our site crashed, and we had like 50,000 views on this thing, and we were like, okay, well this might be something worth actually spending time with. By the end of that first week, we got a call from Arup, which is definitely one of the largest, most innovative engineering firms in the entire world. We wouldn't have ever thought we would have a conversation with these guys. And the principal of the New York office, avid swimmer, as it comes to find out, takes us out to lunch and says, I've got magic money floating in the company. We'll just help you guys prove to the world that this thing can happen. And like, that sounds awesome. PlayLab or PlayLab. So let's try to do this thing. So we spent 6 months, starting this winter, diving deep with a feasibility report, proving that this thing could work mechanically, the filtration could probably work, and that most importantly, economically, it could work. The biggest question, though, was the filtration, which didn't exist in the world yet. But we had always imagined it as a big Brita filter just dropped in the middle of the river. And we presented this idea to Arup, and they said, actually, like, that's not too far off, except for that Britas use carbon, and you can't do that because, you'd have to backwash it. And we're like, well, you can rotate the pool, and then the current can backwash it. No, that's not that strong of current. So we went into, well, let me back up here. We needed to raise money to prove that this filtration could work. we had outlined 3 major steps for that, and we wanted to get started. We wanted to keep rolling this ball up the hill as far as we possibly could. So we went to Kickstarter to raise money to see if we could at least get to the next step, seeing as how we had already gotten so far in the project. You know, it couldn't hurt to try to get one step further. We wanted $25,000 to test the first step, knowing that if we reached close to 50, that we could test the second step. We had reached 25 by the first week and ended up raising $41,000 to test the filtration. So we didn't know what to do, so we started calling a lot of people, talking with a lot of people. And the first major thing that happened is that we went up to Columbia University and kind of pitched them the project and said, hey, we need to test the water of the East River over 4 weeks. We need to take 3 or 4 samples a day, and we know we need to solve these issues to get to the next step. And they were like, sure, you know, we've got magic people floating around in Columbia. Like, we'll help you guys figure this out. So long story short, we got approval from a parks department that I won't name, and we got a mobile office and a bunch of equipment donated from Columbia and some scientists and a bunch of filters. And for 4 weeks, we just finished on Tuesday, we tested a massive amount of water and filtered through lots of concentric layers of filters to get the water to the point that we knew that it needed to be to test the second step. Which brings us to where we are now. Somewhere along that time when we announced the Kickstarter campaign, we got a bunch of other magic calls from people that were like, yeah, like we want to see this happen anywhere. And one of those people was the mayor of Sydney, Australia. And he was like, this would be really cool in the river. We're like, yeah, that sounds great. So now, we thought it would be pretty perfect since New York, gets pretty cold during the winter, that we would try to test year-round. So now we're moving into our second phase and trying to get the entire project funded. This was the testing tank at the unknown site, which is pretty obvious here. So this was our plan. That the first step we needed, this is scale little flatman, we needed to test these sort of filters, primary screening. And if we could solve that, we could start testing a little bit bigger. That we could have the primary screening figured out from the last round, that we could move into secondary filtration, we'd get this water, and we could float it in the water as opposed to at an unknown location on a pier. Pier 5. And then if we get to the next stage, that we can move all that into this kind of like ugly floatable prototype of a pool where we can actually have flatman swimming in the river in some clean water. Bringing us to the actual prototype of the pool, which would be one side of the plus, and then eventually get us to the full pool itself, which at this rate I mean, knowing how many hoops we have to go through, are hoping in the next couple of summers to get a lot closer, but cross your fingers. This is the last project I want to present. This is an example more of a client coming to us and asking us to propose an idea to them. There's an organization called Beam Camp, which sends people anywhere from the age of 7 to 17 to New Hampshire to work with power tools and build projects that architects and designers provide the plans for. And they wanted to come to Brooklyn because they've been incredibly successful, and it's a pretty amazing organization. But they didn't really know how to get started, and so they said, well, you know, could you guys just help us figure out how to get started here and design one project for us that these guys can tinker with and build? And so we're like, yeah, you know, we can design a little box that your friends can play with, but we would rather make something, you know, obviously public and fun for people to interact with. So we kind of, this is actually right across the street from our studio in Crown Heights. And we see this a lot in Crown Heights, but I think we see this a lot in Brooklyn in general, are these empty lots all over the city, slated for construction. Some are have been turned into parks, which are really nice, or flower gardens. But and Crown Heights especially, they're pretty abrupt scars in the landscape, where, you know, in an urban city, you really expect to see that building complete that block for you. And it's just a missed opportunity for community interaction, in our opinions. So we started thinking about where most people in the community in Brooklyn we saw interacting, which happened to be on stoops most of the time. This is where people are, you know, drinking juice and, you know, playing hopscotch and watching TV on their iPhones, lots of different things. And we were like, man, this is really cool. You know, there's stoops everywhere in Brooklyn surrounding these amazing empty lots. We're like, it would be really cool if you could just have a stoop at this empty lot, but why not make it just a very large stoop? So we're working with Beam Camp at initial level prototyping this right now as we speak, actually, to build these mobile stoops that can go up to buildings that have actually been cemented over. But the overall goal to actually build giant stoops that are temporary solutions before buildings actually get built in these places, potentially made of very strong and sturdy scaffolding, or something like that, but places where actually people can interact. That's basically the end. Dong is not here with us tonight, but if you want to tweet at him or email him, that's the information below. Cool.
Nice.